What's up everyone? Vinny Musso from Musso Athletics here for day 4 of our 30 days of force. For today we're going to be talking about multi-planar force absorption, and for today's video there won't be as much explanation on the board. I want today to be more about trying to get as many exercises that as many people out there as possible can find interesting and useful to take into whatever their profession or whatever their field is. Okay, so not so much board work, more about exercise demonstrations today. So just a quick, I know this will be kind of a review for a lot of people, but for some people out there, again, review is always good, but for some people, this might be new, or it might help them explain something that they're having, difficulty understanding. So essentially there's 3 planes of movement that the human body can go through. And the first one is the frontal plane. So you can think about the frontal plane, imagine like I had a sheet of glass that went through the top of my head down to my toes, okay? So the frontal plane is essentially what divides the body into a front and a back, okay? And if we're thinking about movement in that plane, again, imagine that plane is like a sheet of glass going through my body down. If I'm talking about movement within that plane, you can think of something like a lateral raise for the shoulder or a lateral leg lift. Those types of movements are working and moving in that frontal plane, okay? Our sagittal plane, now imagine that sheet of glass where instead of coming down here, okay, it's now at this angle and it's coming directly through my body that way, okay? So what that plane does is that divides our body into a left and a right side, okay? And if we're talking about movement within that plane, whereas opposed to our frontal plane was more of our like lateral lift, lateral leg lift, a sagittal plane movement is going to be more something like a delt raise or a front raise, okay? So it's working within that plane of that imaginary sheet of glass that's dividing my body into a right and a left section, okay? And then our third one is our transverse plane, okay? So now I want you to imagine that sheet of glass is now going through my body right here, and that plane is dividing my body into a top and a bottom, okay? So in terms of movements within that plane, those are more of your rotational movements, okay? So any type of twisting movement, twisting activity, that's really emphasizing our transverse plane. And the point of today's video, I'm going to show as many exercises as I can, the theme being, again, multi-planar. So think about, any type of movement in sport, or really any type of movement a lot of movement in your everyday life. How often are you just working in one plane? How often are you just working in the frontal plane, just working in the sagittal plane, or just working in the transverse plane, okay? Answer to that is, rarely are you ever just moving in one plane at a time, okay? So even, a movement like walking, you may think you're just, moving forward, but your body is going through a lot of rotation even while you're moving, in a linear fashion. So that is an example of a movement, very common movement that a lot of people think you're just going through one plane of movement, but you're actually going through, multiple planes of movement. Okay? And it's even more so in sport. Rarely, if ever, in a sport are you just working in one of these 3 planes of movements. So in terms of our concept, our force absorption that we've been talking about for these past couple of days, we want to be good at absorbing force in multiple planes. Okay? So yes, doing an exercise like a single leg, absolute unilateral eccentric squat down to a box, very good for developing our eccentric strength, working on our pull downs, again, pulling myself down, landing in 2 feet to work on my rate of force development, definitely beneficial to work those, but we also want to make sure that we're working and absorbing force in multiple planes at a time. So we don't want to just isolate, work on isolating just absorbing force in each of these planes individually. We want to work on absorbing force in multiple planes, because again, that's going to simulate more, what movements we go through in everyday life or everyday activities, and what movements we go through in sport. Okay, so again, the rest of this video will be exercises showing, absorbing force, working on slow eccentrics in multiple planes, working on rate of force development in multiple planes.